All right, hey everybody. Goldriver just did a stream recently. Another good stream. Bless up, blessed be Goldriver for Lost Ark. And he was talking about some of the next steps that they wanted to implement for the game after they released a bunch of changes that came to the West as well in terms of the Guardian Raid changes, the Chaos Dungeon changes, a lot of like the gold earning, like reward structure changes that they're having. The Lost Ark is going through a phase where a lot of the systems and content in the game is being reshaped to kind of fit a new world order, you might say, kind of responding to a lot of like player sentiment that has been transforming and changing over the years. So let's take a look at Saint One's recap. And I wanted to go over each of these points and kind of give like a plus and minus to it, kind of talk about what I feel about the changes, and then maybe give kind of like what I think a short term and a long term perspective of these things might be. Thought that would be interesting. One thing to keep in mind is obviously this is through the lens of Saint One and whoever translated for him. I did briefly watch a video that Zills did about it, and it gives a little bit additional context for what's being mentioned here. Obviously, I won't actually really get an accurate picture for what Goldriver said himself because I don't understand Korean and I didn't watch the Korean stream, and like the translation, right? Some things are going to be lost. Let's just take this at face value, and kind of like look at it in good faith. So let's take a look at what Saint One has to say, starting from the top. So the first point: Extreme Volton was a success, so they'll think about how to incorporate more bosses as special high-end event encounters with great loot. So my understanding of Extreme Volton is that it gives a lot of really good loot. You do it once every 2 weeks. There is an eye level requirement, and it is uncapped, right? So you can overgear Extreme Volton. Also, its mechanics, as far as I understand, are basically Hell Mode mechanics. I don't even know if they were tuned down from Hell Mode, but it's that level of difficulty. So the pluses for this, what I really like about Extreme Volton, one is that there's a rating avenue of the game that is going to be a little bit more involved, a little bit more advanced for the player. And then I also really like that it's just more rating content, right? I think this is very crucial for the game. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about this later in the video, but one of the biggest issues that Lost Ark is facing right now, especially with the solutions they're implementing into the game, with reducing the time that people spend doing dailies, which I'm totally a fan of, is that eventually they're going to actually need to replace that content with stuff that is actually fun to do, right? To me, it's a big plus that you reduce the time people spend in things like Chaos Dungeons and stuff like that. But then you actually need to have a game that people play, and perhaps Extreme Volton is one piece of many pieces of content added in that can kind of fit that box. Things that I don't like, well, that's a strong word to say, especially because I haven't done it myself. Here are the things that I would question. I don't super like the idea of having the item level be uncapped, right? The fact that you can overgear it, I think this kind of just further perpetuates in many aspects the gatekeeping culture of the game. So it does alleviate one point where you only have to do it once every 2 weeks, right? So one aspect that affects gatekeeping in Lost Ark is the fact that you feel like you have to do everything either daily or weekly, right? The amount of tasks that you have to get done is a lot, which pressures players into feeling like they always want to pick up groups that can efficiently clear content because they want to get their rewards as they want to get out of there so that they can get more rewards, right? I feel like this is pretty well understood in the Lost Ark community. And so some of the things that exacerbate that, nobody wants to take anybody who's on eye level, right? And I think actually it's a very apt time to talk about this because with the Aeromancer release and the Hyper Express release and a lot of new players trying the game, they're finding that when they get to 1490, it's really hard for them to get to 1500 because they need to do Brel Gate 1 and 2, but nobody is taking 1490s into Brel Gate 1 and 2, at least not commonly in a pug situation. Oftentimes you'll need to have a friend kind of get you into group or something like that. Just speaking generally, obviously there is a way if you try hard enough, but if we're going to speak honestly, why does there have to be such difficulty in a game where supposedly your main content is raiding, right? You want these things to be the easiest possible. You want the new player experience to be, I want to do Belshazzar. I can find a group to do Belshazzar relatively easily, and I can just jump into it and start playing the game, right? The more logistics you have to do, I think it's not good, okay, in my opinion. Already we know that people try to take overgeared people for this content. And so if you give them an avenue where there's value to overgearing the content, there is value to overgearing Extreme Vaulton, that's going to kind of further perpetuate that, right? So I don't really like that it is uncapped in that way, but we'll have to see if it's an actual problem. I think it will be, but it's mitigated a little bit by only having to do it once every 2 weeks. If it's the same as Hell Vaulton, now Hell Vaulton, to my understanding, is the easiest out of all the Hell modes that have been released so far. There has to be a midway point, right? My opinion on the current Legion raids is that the current system and reward structure and lockout structure of the current Legion raids makes me feel like Legion raids should be very easy. They should be very, very easy entry level. Now, the way that they're designing some of the Legion raids, especially like Belshazzar hard, potentially Akan hard, I haven't tried it yet. Even things like maybe Kango hard, I don't know. But I think there's a tier of difficulty above that, that's above what I think Legion raid difficulty should be, which I think is super easy Legion raids. There should be something a little bit harder above that that has roster-wide rewards and generous lockout time, so not weekly maybe. Something like that, right? Something that you can do that gives you really efficient rewards and it's a little bit harder. So kind of like the reward structure for Extreme Vaulton. But I think that should be below the difficulty of Hell mode, if that makes sense. So I think there should be 3 tiers, right? Hell mode, the rewards should be completely cosmetic. I think they need to improve the rewards for Hell mode, by the way. Completely cosmetic. And probably the hardest stuff, right? That's fine. Legion raids in the current system should be the easiest and should give you the rewards that they currently give you, right? Basically, reward structure is somewhat similar, but it should be super easy. There should be the ability to take whatever you want because you are trying to pug these things. It should be easy to just find a group and go and play it, and people shouldn't feel like they need to gatekeep because it's that easy, right? And then there should be a difficulty above that that's like roster-wide rewards, really efficient rewards, really good rewards. I think this should be like this middle space, right? Extreme Vaulton feels like it should be filling out this middle space of difficulty that I'm outlining. Hopefully that made sense. That's my thoughts about Extreme Vaulton. Caveat, I haven't played it myself. So after I try it myself, we'll see how it goes. But those are my thoughts about it. I'm glad it was a success because, again, the pluses for this content is I think there needs to be more fun stuff for people to do. And Extreme Vaulting could be one of those. Okay, this next point is talking about the Fate Embers and increasing gold acquisition. So far, this is just reflecting on the benefits of the Fate Embers and the gold acquisition. Here's my stance on gold. I think so vertical progression is obviously a core part of Lost Ark. I think in terms of gold acquisition, it's really important to do a few things, right? The reward structure in Lost Ark has been really off kilter. It's been really hard to progress on some of the more basic levels. Even things like honing and stuff like that, like the basic things that you need to do to unlock content in the game, right? You can't do Belshazzar until you get to 1490. You can't do Kangel until you get to 1540. You can't do whatever Guardian raid until you get to this. These things, by and large, I think should be really easy to do, okay? When you increase gold acquisition, there's going to be inflation. But the nice thing about that is things like your per tap for honing, your per tap for quality, these prices should stay the same, right? So they need to increase the amount of gold acquisition that players have while maintaining the level it costs to do basic bookkeeping things like tapping honing, tapping quality, whatever it is that you need to do, right? And then they need to make it really cheap for you, much cheaper than it currently is, to move up the ladder in this way, and then provide more interesting outlets for people to spend money on things that I think are not associated with vertical progression. This is super important. They need to add much more fun things to spend your gold on that don't have to do with vertical progression, because the instant you make the gold sink vertical progression, gatekeeping, right? People falling behind, right? Like all this stuff kind of just the same problem, just shifted to a different place. Does that make sense? You're maintaining the same problem, You're just shifting it to a different place if the gold sink is vertical progression. It's very dangerous. I think overall, you need to balance your vertical progression to a pacing that feels rewarding and fun to the players and does not feel like a grind, okay? And when I say does not feel like a grind, I mean does not feel like I do my dailies and I get 1 tap a day when my chances is 1.5%, right? That shit is terrible. They need to get rid of that, okay? So improving gold acquisition is good, but there's some additional context that I think is missing about this. There's some things where this could go horribly wrong, right? Hey, we increased all the gold acquisition that players have. By the way, we added a new gold sink in that weird thing that they talked about in Loa on Summer where they're adding in like that Minesweeper vertical progression thing. Hey, we're adding in elixirs, more gold sinks, more vertical progression. It's like you need to, it's just about the relative cost balancing, right? Like if you keep adding vertical progression to the game that's a gold sink, you're going to need to keep increasing the acquisition of gold. At some point, you may as well just decide to have that balance set at a certain point and then go with that, and then add more fun things that you can spend your gold on. I think in Zeal's video, he mentioned that Goldriver was talking a little bit about this, but it's super important. It's super important, okay? Just the gold acquisition alone doesn't solve the problem, in my opinion. Let's see, they want to implement more quality of life that makes the game more convenient, like the Alt-Q menu, but balance it. Was the Alt-Q menu more convenient? Oh, I guess in terms of like queuing for things like Adventure Islands and stuff like that. Yeah. I'm not decided on a new UI for the Alt-Q menu, but we'll see. But balance it with content and events that encourage players to gather for the feeling of an MMO. Yes. So I do think that this is important. There's some challenges that I can recognize with this. One is that it's much more convenient for the way Lost Ark is to be a theme park MMO, but you definitely need to still have community spaces and reasons for people to gather. There's no guild housing, right? There's no like the guild quests and stuff and the weird racing islands that you do. I think it's just trash content. Yeah, I don't know. I think they need to figure that out somehow. I've had some suggestions for daily quests and stuff like that and rewards that they can do to incorporate that as a main part of the game that can encourage players and communities to play with each other more. But, you know, there's a million ways to do it. My way is definitely not the best way. So they just need to figure it out. I agree that this is an important goal, but they also need to recognize that their MMO is best suited to be a theme park MMO. If they add more stuff like the old Adventure Islands, it's never going to work, right? It's never going to work. Okay, next point. Remove Vicus Gate 1. Removing gates, kind of whatever. I think this is... So, removing gates to me is kind of whatever, and the reason why I say that is that really about rating and gates, to me it's not about the volume necessarily, it's about the reward structure and how fun it is, okay? So the reason why people feel compelled to farm as much gold as they can is currently it is relatively super expensive to progress your character and your gold income is not that much, okay? I think relatively it is expensive to progress your character and it is hard to earn gold. Now, if they change it, let's take the other extreme as an example. If it was super easy to make gold and you had an excess of gold, and then it was very cheap to progress your character, the raids that are not fun, you would just be able to not do, right? Because you don't feel like you need to farm the gold for anything. Does that make sense? So to me, removing raids and whatever is kind of like it's kind of whatever, right? Like the real question that this point should be addressing is we need to be thinking about adding more fun raids. We need to be adding more raids that are fun to do, engaging to do, and then we need to be changing the reward structure so that you don't feel compelled to do every little terrible piece of raid content that's available, right? Let's just take, for example, that, you know, I don't necessarily know if any of these gates are super terrible. I might have my own opinion about them, but let's just say that we really didn't like Vicus Gate 1. If we were able to skip that, right, that's great. Okay, so I guess another problem is you have to do gates 1, 2, and 3. You can't just pick gate 2, pick gate 3, right? So that might be an issue. But let's say I didn't like Vicus. I could decide to not do Vicus because I really don't need the gold from it, right? In this world where it's super easy to gain gold and super cheap to hone, I could just say, I don't like Vicus, I'm not going to do it. In the ideal world, it's I want to do Vicus because I really enjoy the fight and it's super fun, and I get a lot of good rewards out of it that I can spend on aesthetics that I really like, right? This should be the ideal world for this stuff. So them removing these gates to me is kind of whatever. It's nice in the short term. I forgot to do short term, long term, but I think so far we've been coherent. In the short term, this is fine. In the long term, they need a better solution, right? Like they just need to make, it's kind of a stupid statement. They just need to make better raids, right? They need to make better raids and then they need to fix their reward structure. Okay, let's look at the next point. Ghost Ship, Chaos Gate, and Secret Maps will be merged all into Chaos Gate, and the structure and reward will be significantly improved. Okay, you run into a big room with other players and zerg down the enemies without running around as much. Considering other quality of life as well, like cross-server matchmaking for that. Okay, so there's big pluses and minuses for me about this too. I really do not care for any of these pieces of content. To me, they're very boring and very dry. Okay? That doesn't mean I don't think there's a way for them to make it fun, but here's something dangerous that they're doing with their current iteration of Guardian raids and Chaos Dungeons. Mostly Chaos Dungeons, but and Cube as well. Like, what is the real gameplay value of Cube? Basically, they've designed these pieces of content, right? The only reason why Chaos Dungeons exist is to be a daily reward cycle for the player. I personally don't feel like they've put in the effort to make that an interactive, real part of the game. Okay? And the example that I gave for Chaos Dungeons is like, if you look at a game like Path of Exile or an ARPG or something like Diablo or whatever, right? Like, there is a deep system that involves like dungeon crawling, mob farming, right? The trade-off between like AoE farming and single target damage for bosses and stuff like that. Like this definitely exists in PoE. Yeah, your build design, you have the flexibility to do that. None of that really exists in Lost Ark, and it definitely doesn't exist in a Chaos Dungeon, right? You're never thinking about like, oh, how do I handle the boss in the second room of my Chaos Dungeon? I don't think I have the build for it. I might need to optimize for that. You never think about that, right? There's never any interactive decision being made when you do Chaos Dungeons. That doesn't mean that they can't change it, but their short-term solutions kind of like beg the question of like, what are you going to do for your long-term solution? These things, this is fine, but I really have hesitation when they make content purely for reward. If you make your content so simple that you can just mindlessly zerg down enemies and the only value of your content is the reward that you get at the end, this feels unsubstantial to me, okay? I think that's the big danger with changes like these. Obviously, we're talking about practical terms, ideal world, short term, long term, right? So in the short term, I think this is great because I will never do these things. I do my cubes way more often than I did them before because they're way easier and it's not boss rushing cube and the rewards are like they're fine, you know? If they improve the rewards, it would make me do it more purely for the rewards. Same thing for like the dailies and the Guardian raids right now, right? You do them more because the rewards are just relatively better. But in the long term, imagine Lost Ark the game as it's ridden with mindless content that are played just for rewards. Not great. Not very fun, okay? So I think they need to be very careful about that. Planning on adding new systems for new players that greatly expedite any horizontal collectibles that contribute to character power. Hyper Express for horizontal collectibles. This is super great. Everything about this is super duper great. There was a time period, like I am sure for some of us who've played Lost Ark when the game released, I'm sure. I think it was pretty fun for me too. When all my friends and we were all hanging out and we were all playing together, right? And we were all doing the horizontal content together, that was super fun. That time is gone. Never gonna come back, right? That experience is never coming back. The content can't be enjoyed in that way anymore. And so they should just change with the times, okay? So I think this is super good. I think this is super duper. If they add new horizontal content, things like this, which I think they should probably avoid vertical progression, character power stuff if they do it. And they can make it current where everybody in the game can kind of like do it at the same time. So even if you're a new player, you can do it with me who's a veteran player, right? I'm fine with that. And then after they're done with that, they just put it into the system that allows you to catch up and gain it for free after that time period is done. That's, I think, how you should probably design these systems. Because if you keep adding in, oh, we added in like the omnium stars, right? They added that in tier 3, or we're adding in this other thing, or we're adding this in this other thing. Eventually, you're just stacking them up. You're stacking them up, and you're never catching people up. You're just adding more and more and more and more. And now, like, the new player needs, they're gonna need elixirs, they're gonna need the relic set, they're gonna need their card set, they're gonna need their gems, right? You just keep adding these things up. They need their runes, they need their skill points, right? It's just too much. You can't keep adding to the ladder. It's not realistic. Your vertical progression ladder needs to be realistic, and people need to feel like they're climbing that ladder together, not separately. Okay. So this is just a win. Now, as a side note, Amazon was talking about how they were going to add new player servers into the game. Now, that sounds good on paper, but there are so many details that are missing about that are crucial to its success, right? Like, what does this mean for the market? If you have a new server with just new players playing in it, how are you going to get any accessory, right? Like, they need, like, just adding in a new server doesn't solve anything, right? You need better drop rates, you need target farming, right? Like, I don't know, but this kind of like supplements some of that, right? If this is actually true and they're going to implement a system like this, then it's fine, because then, like, another problem with a new server is there's no population. Who's going to be doing the adventure islands, right? If you have like, if you're on a tiny server with just new players in it, and there's like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 people on at a time, and you go to an island and you can't do it, right? Like, you already can't do it on the main server. Maybe if there's more people doing it, there will be more people there, but I still think it's like, it's terrible, right? It's not a good experience. So many things in Lost Ark require high population. If you kind of segregate the community and just stick a lower population server on its own and isolate them, I don't know if the game works. So this is good. Okay, next set. They will remove entry set and replace it with something that is less all or nothing for positional players. This doesn't mean that they're removing positionals, but I feel like the nature of entropy being so punishing when you don't land the positional is wrong in a game that has random aggro change every few seconds. There should be some risk, but at the moment it's too much risk. So I'm sure Goldriver provided more context for this. Overall, I think this is a pretty good statement. Personally, how I feel, and I feel like this is just an opinion, I feel like positioning in Lost Ark is so baseline that the biggest problems that they had with entropy is either that there was any class that had positionals in this manner at all, or it was that only a few classes had this positional, right? I could see an argument where every single class has the same benefit for hitting a back attack, right? Now, we're going to need to go into fantasy land right now, and you're going to need to use your imagination a lot. But I feel like there's an argument that can be made that positioning, reading at boss patterns, this is foundational to Lost Ark's boss combat system. And having some players being rewarded for playing the game in a foundational way versus other classes that are not is inherently a problem, right? And especially in the current system of entropy, where you're doing double, triple your damage, right? More than double, certainly more than double. I think it's a little under triple or something like that. I don't really know the math, but I know it's way more. It's almost never, never, never worth it to throw your attack if it's not a back attack. Almost never, if you're playing entropy, right? That is, as they say, way too all or nothing for something that's foundational to the game. If you make entropy too strong, all these players are still doing the same thing, right? To a lesser or stronger degree, right? In essence, right, if we even look at a Hitmaster class, now balancing wise, it might not end up being true, but theoretically, they're doing the same thing, right? If you take like Akir or Doomsday or Punisher Slayer or something like that, right? It's not as if you're not reading the boss attacks. It's not as if you're, well, I said Punisher Slayer, but they're entropy, right? But the point is, like, there's a different dynamic where you're still, like, reading the enemy's movesets, and you're still trying to figure out what the enemy is going to do. These classes aren't just randomly pressing their buttons, right? Maybe you have something that's, like, Reflex Sork or something like that that is just mostly pianoing, and they're, to a very small degree, looking at boss moveset, right? But, like, for the most part, there's not a lot of classes out there that are just literally ignoring what the boss is doing, right? And if they are, I would say that they're probably a pretty badly designed class in the context of Lost Ark, the game. So, with that being said, I feel like it's really weird that you have these entropy classes that, if they're designed to make them feel satisfying, they're doing way too much damage for doing a similar calculation that a lot of classes are doing. If you're making them weaker, then they feel bad because everybody else is doing the same thing, but you need to still hit a back attack to even do half decent damage, right? Either way you have it, it feels terrible. If you normalize the benefit for every single class, then there's no problem, right? Or in this picture where they're saying, that's essentially what they're saying, but I don't know if it's possible to do with the way that back attacks work right now. This was a little bit rambly, but the point being is that I think generally they're correct in this assessment, but the nature of how they fix it, are they just going to play this yo-yo of balancing where it's like, we're going to make entropy too strong, we're going to make entropy too weak, we're going to make entropy too strong? That's basically the nature of this all or nothing detail here, right? In its current form, there's no way that you can make entropy work in the game. So they need pretty big rehauls for it to actually work. That's my opinion. They acknowledge support players don't feel any big difference in feedback as they gear up. They don't have a solution for this yet. This is so true. The issue is support players can't see their heals with DPS buffs. Yeah. Stronger than DPS players, see damage numbers improve. Yeah. I actually think that this isn't just a problem with support players. Transformation classes, I think, have essentially the same problem, where like a lot of your tripods don't mean anything. A lot of your gems don't mean anything, right? You just need 2 gems or whatever, right? Really, really weird. Overall, the problem is that you have classes that don't seem to interact with core parts of the game's progression system, which I think can either feel really good because you're like, oh, I don't have to do anything in the game and I can just play, right? It feels really good to play a transformation class and being like, I got my 1 gem, I'm done, you know? That can feel good. But on the flip side, I would argue that it's like you're missing out on all the point of like the RPG vertical progression system that Lost Ark leans on so much, where ideally you can gear up your character over a long period of time and feel like there's really great ways that your character is growing and changing and providing you more options to play, right? I think it's much more interesting to play a character that throughout its lifetime, you're getting multiple different interesting ways to play your class as you're getting more gear, more items, more options, you know? How does this relate to support players? Support players don't feel any big difference in feedback as they gear up. I think this is essentially because they're like not doing crucial parts of the game for the most part, right? Like the way that support players play is not really, they're kind of playing a different game than everybody else. And so they just don't have the system to support that. I think being able to see the effect of their heals or DPS is good. And I don't even know, like, obviously they should add in the numerical stuff. I'm a big advocate of clear information for your output. You know, DPS, the Bible, you know, DPS meter, you know. I'm a very strong advocate of that, you know, not saying if I do or do not use it. Personally, I feel like being able to understand your output optionally is very important, okay? But I think this is super good. However, I think that things that would feel better is like if you have good push immunity timing, if you have good barrier timing, if you have good timing on these things, that should be something that improves your output and improves your performance as a support player. And your gearing should reflect that, right? It should improve your ability to make these good decisions. All supports right now are basically mega super uptime classes, right? You're just trying to build your meter and throw out all your skills as often as possible. All 3 supports basically use swiftness. Even Spec Bard kind of plays mostly like an uptime class, right? It's very hard for people to generally like time shields for every single hit because it's just not how the game works. So you try to go for shield uptime, right? You're trying to have shields up as often as you can so it catches hits, you know? But if there was some more agency and some more interaction between how supports had to play and the benefits they get for playing correctly and timing things well, then maybe we see like an avenue in which you can scale with gear or like with expression of skill or something like that, right? All that to say, supports, I think they need a good, hard, long look at because they're just underdeveloped in so many aspects. So this is good in a sense that they acknowledge it, but it's bad in that they don't have a solution yet, even though I think it's a little bit crucial. One of the things that's super big about gatekeeping, or not gatekeeping, but like the delay between when you want to do a raid and when you can do a raid, is that you need to find a support player, right? There are a few things that can help this. If you just get rid of supports overall, not saying that this is the option, if you get rid of that role requirement, then you improve your chances of just playing the game infinitely. Or if you make it so that there are more people who like to play the support class and like that gameplay, and then you have way more supports playing, then you also alleviate that a little bit, okay? So it's really important that they work on this. Okay, going next. Battle items will get their own separate tab, roster wide. Thank God, this is just a good change, in my opinion. So, in my opinion, the long term view of this, like, just honestly, just make battle items global skills that you can hotkey, right? You guys understand what I'm saying? Who really cares? Honestly, in the way that they're used, who really cares? Just make battle items global skills that everybody can pick. This time, I choose to have the whirlwind grenade skill. I choose to have the panacea skill, right? What's the difference, really? Is there really like a gameplay like necessary thing that comes with battle items? Like battle items and the resource aspect of it and the finite resource aspect of it, I think makes sense in a game where there is like economy PvP, right? And there's some systems that are interacting with it. But as it stands right now, it's just a gold sink. And in terms of gold sinks, like we talked about earlier in the video when we were talking about gold acquisition, this is just all relative, right? Like it's just you just need to decide what the number is at. Like the amount of things is it's arbitrary, right? Your gold sink doesn't need to be battle items, right? And it's annoying, and there's no gameplay interaction for it, right? If you're doing like a world PvP game, right? If there was like castle sieges and economy, and like it was important for you to control territory to farm resources to get this stuff, right? Then like okay, maybe this makes sense, but Lost Ark is not that game, okay? We are not Eve, we're not Lineage, we're not Black Desert. We're not that game, okay? It's not a thing. Just make it a skill. Just make it global skills that you can equip. Ocean liners can now travel. I don't even need to finish this statement. I know this is good. Let's be honest, Lost Ark is a theme park MMO, right? There are ways that you can make like cooperative MMO feeling spaces, but it is not in like this open world stuff, right? At least not in the way that they're designing it right now. This is just good. Just good. Okay. Mine's update is called Eclipse. It includes his raid, a new Guardian raid, not a reskin. Thank the Lord. Chaos Dungeon, don't really care. Chaos Dungeons are all the same. Hyper Express, that's different than Super Makoko. Okay, great. The Gear Transcendence feature related to Theamine. I think this is the Minesweeper thing. Box, whatever. Stronghold, whatever. Chaos Gate update. Cool. Okay, cool. Not much there. And then Saint had a follow-up tweet here added to the thread, which I think holds some important information. One point I forgot to mention, new players are overwhelmed having to learn so many raid mechanics to so many raids. True. There are a lot of raids for new players to learn. So this is a pretty complicated topic in my head. Their plans to add new solo type of content. Cool. Solo Vaultum, Solo Vicus, fine. They need to consider support players. Great. Positional players, fine. This and gate removal of raids. Please understand that for many folk, these raids are very old content now. They want to focus more on concurrent endgame raids and not spend so much time on older raids. Most people are generally positive towards these ideas. Yeah. Saint mentions here, versus other MMOs where you kind of catapult to the last few relevant raids in the current expansion. What is the reason why MMOs do this, okay? One of Lost Ark's biggest problems is that the community is never doing something together at any point, right? It's very rare that the entire community is all excited about doing something. And that is further diluted by the fact that North America is the way that it is, okay? So here's one thing that I personally believe is the truth of how Lost Ark, the game, is for us. Let me go back to the experience when Lost Ark first released. One of the reasons why it was so fun was because everybody felt like they were kind of doing the same thing at the same time, progressing their characters all at the same time. Not just server-wide, but in your friend group too. I'm sure many of you can relate to you and your friends all start out Lost Ark, and you're excited to go through the story quest and do the story quest with your friends, really. It was a terrible experience, right? Let me caveat this by saying early Lost Ark was one of the worst versions of the game, right? All that shit was so bad. But you were going through your Guardian raids for the first time, going through your Abyss dungeons for the first time, and everybody's doing all this crap. You're learning about the adventure islands and what you need to do, and people are sharing information, getting excited about how to progress their characters and stuff like that. That existed right when Lost Ark released, right? And then eventually, as Vaulton came out, then Vikings came out, then Clown came out, then Belshazzar came out. Now that new player who's joined the game who says like, hey, I want to play with you guys, they gotta level the character, do the story quest, do all the horizontal shit, potentially even do like the tier 2 Abyss or whatever, right? Like, then when they get there, they gotta do Argos, and then they gotta do Vaulton, and then they gotta do Vicus, and they had none of the catch up that we have now, right? Like, they actually have to do it. They needed to hone their character from like 1340 to 1370. They needed to hone their character from 1370 to 1415, right? Like, that honing journey was so wide. They were spending this much time trying to get to just the first Legion raid to not even be at the current point of content for the players who are already doing Legion raids, right? At some point, we're already doing Vicus, Clown, Brel, and then you still need to spend a lot of effort to get to Vaulton, you know? All that to say is that after the release of Lost Ark, there has never been another time where the entire community has been able to say, here's a new piece of content that we're all super excited about enjoying together. Okay? At the very best, what's happened is a con has released, and all of the most honed players at 1580, all the most hardcore players who have been playing for weeks, right? Who have been playing, maybe they like mega farmed and they quit, maybe, but all the most involved players all can enjoy that recent content, and that's the only thing that they can enjoy, right? Those are the only people who can enjoy the new content, right? Okay. So let's look at the example of just like an MMO releasing an expansion. One of the most fun parts about an MMO releasing an expansion is everybody is enjoying all this really exciting, undiscovered new content together, right? You start the game, you enter the new zone, everybody's questing and leveling up again. They're going into the raids for the first time. You're looking for other people who have progressed around your same pace. I'm trying to pug and find a group to do this one Guardian raid, and I need to find players who are progressed at my point. I have a friend who's caught up to me. We have a friend group where we're like, okay, let's all push to this eye level together so we can do this, right? That's what the new expansion that's what it feels like to play a new expansion, right? Everybody's excited to do all the new content that's available to everybody at the same time. This is the MMO experience where you feel like you're playing with the community, okay? This is the feeling of playing with the community. That doesn't happen with Lost Ark because they've just increased that ladder, right? That vertical progression ladder, they've only just added more rungs. They've just added more rungs. They never pulled up. They never helped the players on the bottom end of the ladder come up, right? They can't just keep adding this stuff on top of each other. At some point, you just need to say, everybody's going to start at this point so everybody can enjoy the game at this point, okay? Now, I'm not saying they necessarily need to do that for every single expansion, but Lost Ark has been going on in Korea for how many years, and they've had no expansions. They've had no resets, okay? None. 0 resets. Those guys have not had the experience where everybody in the community is able to enjoy the game together. They've never had that in all their years of playing. Never. Okay? So, that's just one side of it. Here's the other side of it, okay? North America or the West will never even have the experience where we're all progressing the raid fresh in kind of like this global fashion, right? When Korea releases Theamine, when Korea released Akan, when Korea released Voldyke, there's so much excitement about them going into this raid. Everybody's doing it for the first time. Everybody's progressing the raid. Like North America, unless you try to do a blind raid, and even then, it's not the same. Okay, I'm telling you, it is not the same. You are not going to have a blind progression experience that is what it's like for a new raid to release in an MMO because they don't do simultaneous releases, right? So not only is it the case that Lost Ark in general doesn't have this experience where everybody's doing new content at the same time and everybody's discovering, even for the people who are 1580 at a con, more than half of them, I would say, already know what a con is about. The significant majority of the player base already know what a con is about. And I would say, of the players who don't, I would say more than half of them are probably just reading a guide, right? Why are they going to be like, I'm going to blind progress this raid when they can just be like, you know what, let's just read a guide and get this over with? There's a very, 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 very small percentage of players who are going to be like, you know what, let's just spoiler free ourselves and let's just blind progress this and make a pact with each other to blind progress it, right? And think about what they would have to do that, right? They would have to not look at any content creation, any streams that mention anything about a con for however many months it takes before it reaches the West, right? All I'm saying is it's different, okay? It's just different. It's not the same. If imagine Theamine released globally with the West and Korea, for the hardcore players that are actually able to do it, that's going to be a totally new, fresh experience, and it's going to be something really, really interesting. But the West is not going to get that. Okay. All that to say, this point here, I think, is crucial to the experience of feeling like you're playing an MMO in a community, which is, I think, a big issue that Lost Ark needs to make sure they capitalize on every opportunity they can to pull the community together, because your MMO, in a nutshell, is a theme park MMO. Okay? You're not a BDO, you're not a lineage, you're not like an open world, like, oh, I'm gonna just happen to meet somebody and we're gonna do something in the open world, that kind of thing. Even BDO, I think, is mostly like solo play, to be honest. I mean, the node wars and the guild stuff are much more healthy than in Lost Ark, but like, you know, like, you're a theme park MMO, okay? You need to take every opportunity you can to make people feel like they're playing in a community. That's super important. Well, this video ended up way longer than I thought it was going to be. But hopefully you guys had fun with it. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. And if you made it this far, thanks, because it is definitely very long. But I'd love to know what you guys think. And I'll see you on the next video.